So yeah, I mean, this can be kind of conversational too. I drafted some questions just so you had a sense of,
Yeah.
what we were trying to get at. But as I mentioned, like the majority of the work is from the last 30 to 40 years. And so a lot of those artists are still alive, but then the way they came to us was through collectors, not through the artists for the most part. So we're kind of working to address that. And so I guess what I'm curious to kind of hear from you, from your perspective, because you've been privy to the relationships between artists and institutions through your own work, through your family for so many years.
Mhm.
So just to get a sense of like what you've observed or what you think are the state of things in terms of like the relationships between artists and institutions when it comes to their collections practices and relationship building. Is that there? Is it not, kind of thing?
Um, I think there's room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that what you're doing is a great job, because I think there needs to be a solid um, understanding of the artist, who they are, and where they come from. And without knowing that, like you said, how can you best represent somebody and showcase their work without knowing those things?
Right.
So, yeah, giving it some thought about just specific collections. Again, that's so it's a hard discussion. I mean, when there's a
Yeah.
theme, but I always find that you need artists are don't have as much freedom as they used to in creating, and they're getting more directed through galleries that's been driven to appease the market. And so I think a good way to develop that relationship is to support the artist in being free and making what they want without putting any restrictions or limitations, if you will, on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, I guess, what we're trying to think about is how are we a resource? Not so much like what can we take or get, but we have resources, we have this infrastructure, we have these resources, we have a physical space, but we also have, staff who can be of support, we have financial resources. So how can institutions be a better resource to artists in a meaningful way? With all
So,
of
like I
that.
said, yeah, with that being said,
Yeah.
with making sure that they have the ability to create on
Right.
their own. Also, one thing I really notice is that um, there is a bit of disconnection between museums and like you said, institutions, galleries, that I'm finding more often is that I'm getting contacted about artworks being put in exhibitions or collections and never really being contacted myself. That they've
Mm-hmm.
purchased through other
Yeah.
galleries and found works that may be best suited. And I think that having that discussion with the artists and letting them help guide and be a part of what they think should be a part of it is super
Mm-hmm.
important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that's all in the relationship building, right? I mean, to get a sense of how you're representing the work, and I think every institution is a little bit different. I mean, like I was saying, our collection is rather young in a lot of ways, so we're not actually dealing with historical works that are, dealing with repatriation and more museum content. We're, as an art gallery, we have a slightly more contemporary collection in a lot of ways. So we can be a bit more malleable and kind of adjust how we're working. So I think there's a lot of different ways that institutions can be addressing how they're working with folks. But I think, you know, that seems like such an obvious thing to do, to bring the person into the conversation,
Exactly.
right? When you think about it, you're like, well, of course, like you want to represent that work, to have that person, participate in that process. So
Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, like you said, just about the statements, sometimes maybe not being enough, right? And
mhm,
if having that discussion with the artist just opens up the windows, and there may be something that the gallery hasn't seen that they've got that would, best suit the show that they would like to see in there. And those
yeah,
opportunities are lost, I think, by
yeah,
not having by not having that discussion.
Yeah, and I thought it was, interesting too, you wanting to get a sense of what's already in our collection, like what kind of company are you being brought into,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you think of all these works as kind of like a little family of works that all live in this collection together, like how are you coming into that and how will you be holding space within that collection?
Exactly.
So kind of what is the story that's being told? And this is another project, another layer of work that we're trying to do is a bigger project addressing our collection and the access to it and how we present works. Because databases, I mean, galleries and museums are colonial structures. So of course their database is going to work in a very colonial way of categories and classifications and, the categories of information. Are those the best categories? Is that the best way to be holding information? So I don't know if you've noticed anything or if there's anything that stands out for you in terms of ways that it's really not serving the work to be cataloged in a certain way or the information to be stored in a way, like what's missing maybe in that.
That's interesting. I don't know, something to grow from there. It's I think that's the difficult part about structuring a collection or exhibition is that, and for instance, like we'd mentioned, galleries or museums picking up certain works that they think suits the show, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it might not have been the exact thing. So it kind of just, I would say, comes back to having the opportunity to have this discussion, letting the artist be a part of it. That's the biggest thing that that I think is missing, because everything else will fall into place after that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Having say in how, because the work is, like you said, these works that we're talking about are personal, like the stories are personal, they're a representation of you. So, once they leave you and go into this other context, what is with them that will give people an understanding of the context they were created in and what they mean to you and how the conversation might evolve around them, because that's kind of what the intention in gallery spaces is, to create conversations. And what information is prompted for what information gets shared to then prompt those conversations, right? And if it again is coming from a perspective that hasn't been in conversation with you, what might they be saying? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed, like, just from my point of view, that some works might be getting picked out just because it might have an animal or something that they may hold significance to, the theme, but may have a completely different meaning, and that's kind of what gets lost, right? Is that interpretation of what it really signifies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you were saying in the stop-low piece that image is a serpent?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've gotten a lot of mixed feedback of this piece, and unless you hear what I have to say, or if you are part of knowing the legends, some people are like, "What's with it? Why is it looks like a two-headed dragon?" Or but really, the face and the inside is the voice of our people, the people of the grass, and the double-headed serpent is a very strong legend told of our land, and not a lot of people would understand that by seeing that. So
I was just thinking about the work that happened for the Form is Meaning exhibition with Neel and Marcia Crosby, lessLIE, and Alana Sayers. And one of the things that came up in those conversations was also the aspect of connections and like across communities and the conversations that happen, and how people learn their practice, like their art form, from a range of people as well. And so the imagery or the stories, like it's not like there's a clean divide sometimes, like sometimes there's overlap. Sometimes things are very, very clearly from a certain community, but there's also kind of a gray area because it's inevitable. Like people talk to each other, like you said, you're in conversation and that should be happening. And when that happens, there's So have you found that as well? Like just working, like talking with other artists, like there's been
Yeah,
influence?
from my perspective, I think, like you said, the gray area, right? I think it's really important that artists do the research and understand who they are, because it takes a great foundation to build on that and then make it your own. And I think that there's a possibility that that might be getting lost a bit, that people are kind of getting influenced off other people that have already gone through that process, right? And I think that there's room for growth and just educating, and that's the best way to represent your community, is by building that foundation. I mean, Indigenous art is evolving and changing, and that's absolutely fantastic. That's part of being an artist and evolution. But again, knowing who you are, where you come from, and having that to work from, I think is what needs to be certain to be happening, right? Yeah.
No, it's such a big part of things, is understanding where your work is coming from and who you are, because the art world, the art market, where the relationship again with institutions, like if you're not really grounded, it can kind of knock you around a bit, right? Like it's a complicated dynamic to step into. So, and like not everyone's always looking out for your best interest or supporting you. And so for you to be saying things like, all of a sudden my work's in a show, but no, there's no context from me provided to that. Like, it's, that's a piece that I think has been happening for a long time. And it happens in a lot of different ways within institutions, where work can be brought in, in a context that may not be, something that the artist feels their work should be living within, right? It's right. Not really an appropriate place for their work to be in conversation. So
just something better suited, right? I think by having that relationship and being able to approach the artist directly and be a part of that selection, you're eliminating that from happening.
Yeah.
And if they don't have it, like, I think part of helping artists as well is supporting them through purchasing through artists directly, and if not, letting them direct you to choose a piece for a collection. And it really just all comes back to being a part of it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have it, but I think there's a missing piece in that support there.
To have more agency in that. Yeah, for sure. Because I think there's so much work happening right now where institutions are really having to be self-aware of how they're working and what kind of like, just to put it right out there, like what kind of oppressive systems are they perpetrating and continuing, and how do we think outside of that, because we're so immersed in it. Like, how do we work outside of that? And I think for my colleagues at our gallery, we're always trying to be very self-aware as much as we can, but a big part of doing that is talking to artists, right? It is
being educated, right?
Yeah, it's in those relationships. Yeah,
and that's definitely something that's been lost, just from growing up and watching the relationship between, for instance, my mother, a renowned artist, her relationship with galleries versus other today's artist relationship. They were unbelievably educated and there for the artists and doing their part to promote, where I feel like it's shifting to a business. And I think that is something that needs to be said. Like, as I mentioned before, in some ways that's putting limitations on the artists. It's being driven to the market, and it's kind of sad that that's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that it's got to happen some ways, but I think that there's just better ways to approach it.
Yeah, that human connection gets lost, and it's just it's a commodity, right? Like
and it's no longer a relationship and friendship and fun. It's it's becoming work and a business,
Yeah.
which I think is could change.
Well, and I think
And it's about
too,
being educated. That's it, right? That's what
yeah,
can change it. Is just making sure that they're educated and supporting.
yeah, yeah. And I just think about the artists that I get to be in conversation with and talk to, and everyone is so busy, like they're working so hard. So to not to not
I
feel
know
good about
that's
it
how
at
I
the
felt. I was like, oh,
right.
interview. You want to be a part of it, and that's what's sad is that you want to engage, but
Yeah,
it's impossible in these days to. Everybody forgets just to sit back and have the discussion, which is one of the most important things. And I'm still learning and forcing myself to engage in that as well, because you forget, right?
hmm,
Like none of us are, we as long as we always have someone to remind us to have those discussions or conversations.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, yeah, you want, I mean, the last thing, you want as a curator is for somebody to be part of something, not understand why they're part of it and walk away just feeling kind of drained from the experience, right? Like that's not what's going to keep us going. And, so much of what art does is it really fills people up and it brings them joy and it engages imagination. And if it's just draining the artist, like the person who is the creator of these great creations, like if it's just a drain like that, our role is in service of the artist. And so if that relationship is unbalanced or not serving the artist, that's again, I think what I'm hearing from you too is like it there needs to be a respect for the work and the time and the individual. So that's a big piece, I think.
exactly.
Yeah. And when
Yeah,
things become a commodity and really commercial, all of that kind of takes a back
exactly.
stage.
It's,
Yeah.
I don't want to say forgotten. That's not right. But it's just, just like anything, it just, when things start, this pace is created, everybody, you got to take the time, which none of
Yeah.
us really do. And I think,
Yeah.
that's what you guys are doing right now, which is great. Um, yeah. And then that's the basic stepping stones to building.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think that's, that is really like, thank you for the insight that you've shared, because that's the other thing too, is sharing those thoughts. We don't want that to be a drain either, right? And that can
Mhm.
be um, a lot of work just to be shared, because if that, again, it's that exchange that takes energy and time too, right? So I really appreciate a bit of time to just
Yeah,
hear how
absolutely.
you're feeling about things, where you're feeling the relationships are at, and the things that can be improved. And yeah, I'm excited for more conversation about these works, and the story that we can create in our collection with your work, and how those can speak to other things, and in building those relationships, the works will live in a different way in the collection with each other, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.